This video is going to run down the 10 most outrageous arguments or claims that I've heard in the last decade. But before I get started, I wanted to remind those of you that haven't subscribed to my channel to go ahead and hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. Number 10. Certain arguments for God only lead to deism, not theism.
Now, what about my arguments for theism? Mr. Hitchens had some general remarks here. He says it's difficult to get from deism to theism. Now, I want to point out that's a false use of these terms. This is simply confused. Deism is a type of theism. Theism is the broad worldview that God exists. Deism is a specific kind of theism that says God has not revealed himself directly in the world.
That debate between Craig and Hitchens was in 2009, and you would think that Dr. Craig's rebuttal would have put an end to that talking point. But I saw this posted just a few months ago in 2019. If intelligent design were truly, strongly, objectively evident, that evidence would get you no further than perhaps ancient super aliens, or this is all a simulation, or deism. There would remain no logical way to bridge the gap all the way from there to a personal theistic being, nor would there be a logical bridge available far, far further to any specific version of theism. This is from James Apperson. But just like Hitchens, he has it wrong, because deism is a specific version of theism. Mainly that there is a creator, but the creator doesn't intervene in the universe. So the argument is self-refuting. Number 9, vestigial organs are evidence for macroevolution.
Hey guys, Trace here chatting from D News in DC. Your body is filled with genetic and biological garbage. Not just the junk DNA we've talked about in the past, but actual structures that your body took the time to put together and they don't do anything. A couple of new studies just completed by researchers at Boston University and the University of Liverpool focused on our feet. Take off your shoe and try and bend your foot in the middle. The average human foot should only bend in one place, at the ball. But 1 out of every 13, at least, can bend a second joint in their foot, just like chimps. Everyone's got that joint, but a lot of us, we can't bend it because our bodies added a tough ligament once we started walking upright. Those with softer ligaments, they can still bend their foot, like me. Not Anthony, though, and he's jealous. And that's not all. That's just one of the things that you can do at parties. Genetic stuff we once needed that is now irrelevant or non-functional is called vestigial, a vestige of our evolutionary past. Leftovers, like the second foot joint, are all over in our DNA. The appendix was useful at one point, for example, but now it's just kind of chilling. Some primates have appendices and use them to digest tough cellulose, but we really don't eat that anymore. So now we don't need it. Over the generations of humans, it's become slowly less pronounced, but it's still present, like an evolutionary intestinal time bomb.
The evolutionists have to totally abandon their worldview to even conceive of such an argument, because it's unintelligible on an atheistic evolutionary view. What do I mean? The definition of a vestigial structure is a structure in an organism that has lost all or most of its original function. To say that any structure within an organism has any function at all presupposes purpose, which presupposes design. On an atheistic evolutionary view, biological systems have no purpose or teleology. According to evolutionists, these systems developed over time by natural processes, such as natural selection or random mutations. So to say that an organ does such and such, or did such and such, is not to say it has or had any function, but to say that it benefited or benefits the survival of the species. End of the story. In essence, the atheist evolutionist has to borrow from the theistic worldview to make this teleological argument. Number 8, bad design is evidence of evolution.
We get used to the idea that evolution is so good at producing beautiful, elegant animals that look as though they've been designed. We forget that sometimes they're not perfect and there are imperfections. And the imperfections are very revealing because they're exactly the kind of imperfections you'd expect. from the accidents of history if there were no designer. There's a nerve called the recurrent laryngeal, which runs from the brain, and its end organ is the larynx, and you think it would just go straight there. But in a human, what it does is goes down into the chest, loops around one of the main arteries in the chest, and then goes straight back up again. Obviously a ridiculous detour. No engineer would ever make a mistake like that.
Just in case you didn't know, this argument is self-defeating. Richard Dawkins' argument is essentially poor design is evidence against a designer and in favor of evolution. But this argument totally fails for the following reason. Poor design presupposes design, which presupposes a designer. The argument is basically there's no designer because look at how poorly this is designed. Well, if it's designed, your argument is already destroyed. In order to make the argument, you have to presuppose the thing you want to disprove.
Case dismissed.
Number 7. If God just is, then the universe just is. This comes from a philosopher who happens to say that if God just is, then the universe just is. I have encountered this argument from an amateur atheist as well. This exposes a lack of understanding of necessary and contingent beings or things. It's not enough to say that God or the universe just exists without explanation. Every existing thing has an explanation of its existence, either in the necessity of its own nature or in an external cause. So in order to show that the universe just is, you would need to show that it exists necessarily. If the universe existed necessarily, then it would need to be eternal. But science has strong evidence which shows that the universe is not eternal. It therefore follows that the universe does not exist necessarily. God, on the other hand, is by definition a necessary being. This argument totally fails. Number 6. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
I think there was a partial confusion because I try to be very precise with my language, especially when we're having debates and discussions like this, where I was pointing out there is no contemporary evidence. I was not saying anecdotal evidence, testimonial evidence isn't evidence. Of course it's evidence. It's just that it's never going to be sufficient on its own without physical evidence supporting it to establish extraordinary claims. The fact that people, you could have everyone on the planet testify that they saw somebody rise from the dead, and that may not be enough.
Something being extraordinary is subjective and basically objectively meaningless. In fact, I can say that the claim itself is extraordinary. And since there's no evidence whatsoever to support it, I reject it on its own criteria. Second, the assertion is begging the question. If naturalism or materialism is not true, then the existence of God or the resurrection will not be anything extraordinary. But you can't just presuppose that naturalism is true. It needs to be shown that it's true. And so the claim fails. Number 5. The God of the Bible is evil.
So, atheism is not just about not believing there's a God, but on the assumption that there is one. What kind of God is he? It's perfectly apparent that he is monstrous, utterly monstrous, and deserves no respect whatsoever. The moment you banish him, your life becomes simpler, purer, cleaner, more worth living, in my view.
Atheists that make this argument are in a tough spot. If God does not exist, then morality is just a human convention, meaning that it's subjective and non-binding. To say that something or someone is evil means that that is the case independent of whether anyone believes it or not. But if there's no God, then there will be no objective dimension for morality. So if atheists want to make this argument, then they will need to show what is the basis of objective morality sans a God. Number 4, there is no objective morality.
Great wrong. But my question is, Alex, if you really think that is a great wrong, why would you deny objective morality? I mean, is that really wrong, or is it just a matter of personal opinion?
Well, I think that we agree
in one sense that evil doesn't necessarily disprove God. I'm with you on that. What I would say is to answer your question, objectively, no. It is a subjective thing. Morality, to me, is entirely subjective.
Why do you say that?
Well, because, firstly, a thing to note is that objective morality... Well, let's talk about what objective actually means, I suppose. Objectivity, to me, if you want my definition, would be to say that it is true regardless of human intervention, regardless of human consciousness. For instance, the Earth orbits the Sun. That would be true if all humans disappeared. Right. Every single one of them. It would still be an objective fact. But to say that murder is wrong, if every human disappeared, that couldn't still be wrong, surely. That would be a nonsense concept without some kind of human psychology. The only way that you could argue that perhaps it would still be wrong is if there was some kind of transcendent being. But then you need to have that being in order to prove the existence of the objective morality that you're then using to prove the God. So
there's this book called Finding Truth by Nancy Pearcey, where she talks about people who operate under a false worldview, who have to suppress the truth of reality in order to operate within their worldview. This is what's called cognitive dissonance. It is utter make-believe to assert that there are not things that are objectively evil. The young man in the video says, well, if there were no humans, then the concept of murder would be incoherent. But that's not true. If there were two creatures with free will and one killed the other unjustifiably, it would be murder, and it would be objectively wrong. It is objectively wrong to rape babies. It is objectively good to care for babies. This view is what some will do to escape the theological conclusions of some of the arguments for God. Number 3, theist or atheist?
There's an issue that I perceive as severely problematic by any theist point that involves the fact that every single person in this room, and in fact every single person on this planet, is an atheist many times over in regards to the pantheon of gods that have come before.
It's easy to address. Definition of atheism. Remember, I'm going to read again from the Encyclopedia of Philosophy. According to the most usual definition, an atheist is a person who maintains that there is no God. That is, that the sentence God exists expresses a false proposition. Therefore, in no sense am I an atheist. Just because I deny the existence of Odin and Thor and Zeus and Hermes doesn't make me an atheist, because to be an atheist you need to believe the proposition there is no God. And I believe there is a God.
I'm sorry, but that's semantics.
Excuse me?
That's semantics.
No,
You're
sir,
arguing
it's
semantics.
not. This means that you believe a universally quantified statement. There is no such being as God. And I don't believe that, because I do believe that there is a God.
So use a word other than atheist, it still comes to the same thing.
No, what you have been led astray by a common sort of internet infidel talking point that is given to atheists to use against theists to make it seem like the atheist claim is less radical, that everybody is an atheist about other gods. And that's simply not true, because to be an atheist you have to believe there is no God at all. And I don't believe that, so in no sense am I an atheist.
We now know, given quantum gravity, that universes can spontaneously appear. In fact, one of the things about quantum mechanics is nothing, not only can nothing become something, nothing always becomes something. Nothing is unstable. Nothing will always produce something in quantum mechanics. And if you apply quantum mechanics to gravity, you can show that it's possible that space and time themselves can come into existence when nothing existed before. So that's not a problem.
Well, I would just want to summarize by saying that physical science deals with physical reality, and therefore it is a gross misuse of ordinary language to use the word nothing to characterize either the quantum vacuum, which is a physical reality, or the point from which the universe quantum tunneled into the current state we have in quantum gravity models. These are not non-being. And when the philosopher asks the question, why do contingent beings exist rather than nothing, he's using the word nothing in the philosophical sense of non-being. And there is no physics of non-being. When the universe comes into being, it doesn't transition from non-being into being. That would exist before it existed. Rather, it is an absolute beginning of existence. And therefore, that points to a transcendent cause, a ground of being in a transcendent metaphysical reality, which I think is most plausibly identified as God.
Number 1. No one in the Bible existed. Yes, Kevin Wesley comes in at number 1 for the most outrageous claim of the last decade.
I do. But when I tell you I don't believe in the Bible or any character in the Bible, all of them are fake. All of them are manufactured. None of them ever existed historically.
Congratulations, you played yourself.